This is a recording for the John White testimony. It's a lot of small text here that might be difficult for some students to really read well, so I thought I would try to help and hopefully not convolute the situation by just reading the document out loud here in this recording. I'm going to select the text as I read it so that you know where I am as you follow along, and hopefully this helps. So I'm going to delve right into it. Document 1, John White testimony. John White, governor of the so-called lost colony at Roanoke Island, who was forced to leave his family behind when he sailed for England in 1587. Delayed by the Spanish Armada, White did not return to Roanoke until 1590, arriving to find the settlers gone. The excerpt below is from White's account of the journey, published by Richard Hakluyt in Principal Navigations, Voyages, and Discoveries of the English Nation, 1600. Okay, so we got John White, the governor of a colony that he helps to set up, leaves to go back to England to report in, heads, and then is not able to return for a while because there was an attack coming into England that basically paused every other industry from moving forward for a while. Okay, so let's get to the report. John White returns to Roanoke, an excerpt from The Fifth Voyage of Master John White into the Western Indies and parts of America called Virginia, 1590. So here's the report of that event when John White returned. But before we can get to the place where our planters were left, it was so exceedingly dark that we overshot the place a quarter of a mile. There we espied or saw, towards the north end of the land, the light of a great fire through the woods, to which we presently rode. When we came right over against it, we let fall our grapnel near the shore. That's a type of anchor to keep your boat in place, and sounded with a trumpet a call, and afterwards many familiar English tunes of songs, and called to them friendly. But we had no answers. We therefore landed at daybreak, and coming to the fire, we found the grass and sundry rotten trees burning about the place. From hence we went through the woods to that part of the island, and from thence we returned to the waterside round about the north point of the island, until we came to the place where I left our colony in the year 1586. So if you're reading with me here, you'll notice that John White has gotten to the place where his colony basically was, but he was about a quarter mile off. It was nighttime and they saw a fire. So he had people playing songs and stuff to see if English settlers would come out and recognize that there was a English party off the shore there waiting to find the English settlers. Okay, so on daybreak, they go back to where the colony actually was. And here's what he says he found. Okay. So we've gotten this far. So we're starting here. In all this way, we saw in the sand the print of the salvages, feet of two or three sorts trodden that night. By salvages, he means savages. He's talking about Native Americans. So let me translate this better. In all this way, we saw in the sand the print of the Native Americans, their feet, of two or three of those people trodden that night, meaning who were there that night before we got there. And as we entered up the sandy bank upon a tree, in the very brow thereof were curiously carved these fair Roman letters, CRO. So he's saying that in a tree where the settlement used to be, there was carved CRO. Okay, so that's a clue, a hint of some kind as to where the settlers might have gone, eh? Which letters presently we knew to signify the place where I should find the planters seated, to where the settlers have gone off to, according to a secret token agreed upon between them and me at my last departure from them, which was that in any ways they should not fail to write or carve on the trees or posts of the doors the name of the place where they should be seated. By seated, he means where they're going to go to if they have to leave the colony. For at my coming away, they were prepared to remove from Roanoke 50 miles to the mainland. Therefore, at my departure from them in 1587, I willed them that if they should happen to be distressed in any of those places, that then they should carve over the letters or name a cross in this form. But we found no such sign of distress. And having well considered of this, we passed towards the place. Oops. Okay, here we go. Where they were left in sundry houses, but we found the houses taken down, and the place very strongly enclosed with a high palisade of great trees, with courts and flankers and very fort-like. That's just a type of building forts. Courts and flankers are types of structures that allow you to shoot arrows or guns at people who are trying to attack your walls. And none of the chief trees or posts, let me re-highlight, chief trees or posts at the right side of the entrance had the bark taken off. And 5. What that actually means is that this place was put up real fast. The fort that went around where the colony was have been built very quickly. We think that maybe because the houses that were there when John White left originally and now they're not there, that the wood that was used to build those houses went into the fort wall. So they took down their homes to put up a fort wall, which means something had happened. And one of the chiefs, the biggest trees, or posts at the right side of the entrance had the bark taken. Oh, okay. Here we go. 5 feet from the ground, in fair capital letters, big letters, was graven or written Croatan, without any cross or sign of distress. This done, we entered into the palisade, where we found many bars of iron, 2 pigs of lead, 4 Huron fowlers, iron sackers shot, and such like heavy things, thrown here or there, almost overgrown with grass and weeds. So again, what we're looking at is a quickly established fortress that had gone around where the colonists were, and there's a bunch of stuff left behind from when the colonists left, and there's the word Croatan written at the gateway of the empty fortress. Okay? All right. Let's go here. From thence we went along by the water side towards the point of the creek to see if we could find any of their boats or boats or pinnace, which is a type of vessel, a type of boat. So any of their of their boats that were left when John White went back to England, but we could perceive no signs of them, nor any of the last falcons and small ordnance, that's types of guns, which were left with them at my departure from them. So there's no weaponry or boats left behind. At our return from the creek, some of our sailors meeting us told us that they had found where divers chests had been hidden, or diverse, like various chests had been hidden, and long since dug up again and broken up, and much of the goods in them spoiled and scattered about, but nothing left of such things as the savages knew any use of, undefaced, meaning that the settlers, before they left, apparently hid a bunch of their stuff, hoping to come back and get it later, but the natives had found those things and broken them up and spread things around. Presently, Captain Cook and I went to the place which was in the end of an old trench made 2 years past by Captain Amadas, where we found 5 chests that had been carefully hidden of the planters, and of these same chests there were my own, and about the place many of my things spoiled and broken, and my books torn from the covers, the frames of some of my pictures and maps rotten and spoiled with rain, and my armor almost eaten through with rust. This could be no other but the deeds of the savages, our enemies, who had watched the departure of our men to Croatan. And as soon as they were departed, digged up the Indians, he's saying, digged up every place where they suspected anything to be buried. But although it much grieved me to see such spoil of my goods, yet on the other side I greatly joyed that I had safely found a certain token of their safe being at Croatan. Meaning John White is saying, all of our stuff is destroyed. The settlers obviously left in a bit of a hurry, but at least I know where they are. They're at Croatan, a place where we agreed that they might go to if they had to flee. Okay? All right. So now we have Images of John White's return, and what goes into the English papers. There's John White right there and carved into the palisade, Croatan, right? All right, let's move on to document 3, which is an archaeological document put out in 2018. Here's the title: Archaeologists Start a New Hunt for the Fabled Lost Colony of the New World, by Andrew Lawler. Roanoke Island in North Carolina in 1587, more than 100 men and women and children settled on Roanoke Island in what is now North Carolina. War with Spain prevented speedy resupply of the colony, the first English settlement in the New World, backed by Elizabethan courtier Sir Walter Raleigh. He was the guy that financed the expedition to set this colony up, Sir Walter Raleigh. When the rescue missions arrived 3 years later, the town was abandoned and the colonists had vanished. What is commonly called the lost colony has captured the imaginations of generations of professional and amateur sleuths, but the colonists' fate is not the only mystery. Despite more than a century of digging, no trace has been found of the colonist town, only the remains of a small workshop and an earthen fort that may have been built later, according to a study to be published this year. Now, after a long hiatus, archaeologists plan to resume digging this fall. Quote, I firmly believe that our program of re-excavation will provide answers to the vexing questions that past field work has left us, says archaeologist Eric Klithofer, Vice President for Research at the nonprofit First Colony Foundation in Durham, North Carolina. The first colonists arrived in 1585, when a voyage from England landed more than 100 men here, among them a science team including Joachim Gans, a metallurgist from Prague, and the first known practicing Jew in the Americas. There are people who had settled at this colony. According to the eyewitness accounts, colonists built a substantial town on the island's north end. Gans, a colonist, built a small lab where he worked with scientists Thomas Harriot. After the English assassinated a local Native American leader, however, they faced hostility. So that might be why there was some issues between the local natives and the colonists. After less than a year, the colonists abandoned Roanoke and returned to England. This was the first attempt to settle there. A second wave of colonists, including women and children, this is John White's group, arrived in 1587 and rebuilt the decaying settlement. Their governor artist, John White, returned to England for supplies and more settlers, but war with Spain delayed him in England for 3 years. When he returned here in 1590, he found the town deserted. By that time, President James Monroe paid a visit to the site in 1819. All that remained was the outline of an earthen fort, presumed to have been built by the 1585 all-male colony that got there before John White's colony. Digs near the earthwork in the 1890s and 1940s yielded little. The U.S. National Park Service subsequently reconstructed the earthen mound, forming the centerpiece of today's Fort Raleigh National Historic Site. Then in the 1990s, archaeologists led by Ivor Noel Hume of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation in Virginia uncovered remains of what archaeologists agree was the workshop where Gaines tested rocks for precious metals and Harriet studied plants with medical properties, such as tobacco. Crucibles and pharmaceutical jars littered the floor, along with bits of brick from a special furnace. The layout closely resembled those in 16th century woodcuts of German alchemical workshops. So these are some of the settlers that settled in that colony, and their workshop was discovered by archaeologists later on. In later digs, Noel Hume discovered that the ditch alongside the earthwork cuts across the workshop, suggesting the fort was built after the lab and possibly wasn't even Elizabethan, meaning the fortress was probably built later. The one that they found with archaeological evidence anyway. NPS, the National Park Service, refused to publish these controversial results, and Noel Hume died in 2017. But the Foundation intends to publish his paper in coming months. The foundation is also gearing up for a series of new digs. In September, archaeologists will re excavate parts of the workshop seeking clues to its size and precise design. In October, Foundation and National Park Service archaeologists will excavate along nearby bluffs that are rapidly eroding. They are applying new dating methods to sand around the post hole near the shoreline. After a century of work, they know which areas to rule out, such as by the fort, Klingforth says. He is confident that the excessive new excavations or the extensive new excavations will be more successful and is eyeing more sites for 2019 digs. But geologists think the settlement has vanished. Recent studies suggest that the shifting currents and rising waters have inundated or covered the site in the past couple of centuries, says geologist J.P. Walsh of the University of Northern Carolina. On a recent research trip to Alberni Sound off Roanoke to collect cores, he pointed to a depth finder that revealed perilously shallow water. This was all land back then, he said over the engine. He estimates that the island's north end has lost about 750 meters in the past 400 years, and that strong currents and hurricanes buried any artifacts. So basically, Klinghorf is doing excavations on the land, and meanwhile, a geologist at the same time is saying where those settlers probably settled is probably gone now, buried by rising waters and storms and that sort of thing. So Klinghorf probably isn't going to find anything. That's the controversy going on right here. Klinghorfer rejects that idea, saying the loss of land is more likely to have come since the last ice age rather than after 1585. Guy Prentice, an archaeologist from the National Park Service's Southeast Archaeological Center in Tallahassee, agrees. If you look at the maps from the 1700s, the island's geography has not changed much. I just don't buy that a couple of thousand yards are gone. They both note that the Jamestown settlement in Virginia, founded a couple of decades after Roanoke, was long thought to have eroded away, but archaeologists discovered it in the 1990s and have gathered a wealth of artifacts. So we got three different commentaries here, right? Klinghorfer is saying, I'm going to find more evidence of the Roanoke colony. We haven't found enough yet, and I'm going to find it. A geologist is saying, the colony's gone, you'll never find it. And then this other guy from the National Park Service, Guy Prentice, says, "Well, we think it's probably still there, and we doubt that that the last ice age, or sorry, that the rising waters really have done that much damage because that all happened a long time ago, well before the colony even started. So that's probably not an issue." So that's what's going on here. All right, finally, document 4. A magazine article from the 1800s. Raleigh's Lost Colony. The New England Magazine, 1895 is when this came out. On the way, they were reduced to the necessity of subsisting upon a decoction of sassafras leaves, and when they reached the broad sound which lay between them and their destination, they were weak from want of food. It was on the eye of Easter, and a heavy gale lashing from the waters, foaming billows warned them against attempting the passage in their frail boats. Accordingly, they fasted very truly that day, and on Easter morning were rejoiced with the pleasant skies and tranquil waters. They were expecting, when they reached Chippenham, a fishing station of friendly natives, to be able to obtain fish, to allay the pangs of hunger. But great was their disappointment when they reached the place, late in the afternoon of Easter, to find it deserted. They found, however, a few fish in the abandoned wares, which revived them somewhat, so that the next morning they reached Roanoke in safety. Here Lane found that the people he behind in a perilous situation. Rumors of disaster to his party had reached Roanoke, and Winganya, who upon assuming chieftainship had taken the name Pemisipan and had for some time regarded the English coldly, became offensively insolent to the little colony and its weakness, and condemning it to the Christian faith, which they had shown some regard for, openly taunted the English with the weakness of their God, who had been unable to protect his friends against the fury of the savage Roanokeans. So this is something that came out in the 1860s, all right? And what we're looking at is a New England Magazine article, again, it came out in 1895, that basically has created the story. And we don't have a lot of background for this, but it creates a story that says that the natives of the region where Roanoke was under anger. There were angry natives in the region, and that they were attacking the English colony. And this is something that some eyewitnesses say happened who were traveling along the same coastline. These other English people. So basically, there's some evidence from the people here that are reporting this story that the natives could have destroyed the colony because they were so anti-English at the time. Okay, so let me go ahead and read this part of the remainder of the article that came out of this magazine in 1862. The colony landed on Roanoke consisted of 107 persons, of whom Ralph Lane was the governor, Amadas the admiral, Harriet the historian, and Chaplin, and John White, the artist. So soon as they were settled at the island, they began the exploration of the country. This was done in boats and entirely towards the south. Visiting the Neuse and western shore of Pamlico Sound, they explored Currituck on the east, while in the north they penetrated to the distance of 160 miles and ascended Morato, now known as the Roanoke River, probably more than 50 miles from its mouth. This was done with extreme labor and peril, as the Indians had deluded them with the story of mines of gold, and having notice of Lane's coming, were prepared to attack him. This is saying that the natives had told the settlers that there was gold, and so therefore the settlers went out to go find the gold, which means the settlers were open to being attacked by the natives, meaning it was a trick of the natives to talk about gold so that they could kill more of the colonists. This river he afterwards explored, but before long, ere long means before long, either from oppression or fear of the English, the Indians assumed a hostile attitude and laid plans to surprise them. The English had to be continually on their guard, and in the meantime, famine compelled them to leave Roanoke in large parties to obtain subsistence from the cornfields or proceed along the coast for shellfish. About the 1st of June, 1586, Lane, with a party, left the island, proceeding across the Sound, and by a stratagem hardly authorized in an honorable soldier, captured and killed the chief of the country and many of his people. So what we're looking at is that there was some bad blood, in the words of Taylor Swift, that happened between the colonists and the natives. And there was one point where the English Roanoke settlers went out. We talked about this in an earlier document. Went out and actually killed the leader of the local natives. All right. So how do you think that's going to cause relations to be? All right. Last one. Document 5, Science Daily Article, 1998. The worst droughts of the past 800 years likely played a major role in the mysterious disappearance of Roanoke Island's lost colony. And in the starving time endured by colonists at Jamestown, researchers from the College of William and Mary and the University of Arkansas have concluded, after studying growth rings and ancient trees in the Tidewater area, the findings were just published in the current issue of the Science Journal. Here's the quote. If the English had tried to find a worse time to launch their settlements in the New World, they could not have done so, said Dennis B. Blanton, director of the William and Mary College or Center for Archaeological Research. From 1587, that's when Roanoke was settled, to 1589, the most extreme drought in 800 years is implicated in the disappearance of the lost colony. And the Jamestown settlement was later plagued by the driest 7-year episode in 770 years in this region. These droughts make the dry summer of 1997 pale in comparison. The Roanoke Island settlement was established in 1587, but settlers soon mysteriously disappeared, leaving only the enigmatic word Croatan carved upon a tree. More is known about the hardships of Jamestown, which was founded in 1607, but nearly failed during the period from 1609 to 1610. Historically known as the Starving Time, when the colony suffered an appalling death rate, according to historians. 43% of the 350 colonists alive in June of 1610 were dead by the end of that summer. At Blanton's request, Arkansas climatologists spent several months analyzing the existing core samples, which covered the period between 1185 and 1984, for information about rainfall and temperatures during the tidewater growing season. Archaeologists from William and Mary's Center for Archaeological Research did extensive historical and archaeological research into the past tidewater climate conditions. Both groups then correlated and interpreted the data. All right, here we go. Here's the interpretation of the data. The tree ring data indicate the extraordinary drought conditions that attended the settlement of both the Roanoke and Jamestown colonies, the science article says. A tree growth anomaly map for the period 1587 to 1589, for example, shows that the Lost Colony drought affected the entire southeastern United States, but was particularly severe in the Tidewater region near Roanoke. The cypress growth anomaly map for Jamestown in 1606 to 1612 reveals that the most severe drought conditions during that period occurred in the Tidewater region near Jamestown. Okay, now let's go down to the last quote. The Roanoke and Jamestown colonies have both been criticized for poor planning, poor support, and and for a startling indifference to their own subsistence, concluded the writers in Science. But the tree ring reconstruction indicates that even the best planned and supported colony would have been supremely challenged by the climatic conditions of 1587 to 1589 and 1606 to 1612. All right, this is actually very, very interesting, fairly new research that shows that while there were issues between the colonists and the natives at Roanoke, and it also as you've looked at these documents, there were issues with the planning of the colony and the fact that John White left and could not come back due to a war with Spain for a long time, and eventually comes back and finds the colony destroyed and mostly gone, and a fort that was put up that shows that there was problems between the colonists and the natives, right? That there was one other problem, and that other problem is that they probably would have had a hard time surviving anyway because of a drought. Okay, that's it. Hopefully that helps a little bit. That's a lot of stuff. Normally it would take several hours to go through all this. That's just what research is. And you could only really, as a note, as an aside, you can only really, when you're reading documents like this to apply to a question of research or like your assignment, there's little bits and pieces that apply and a lot of stuff that doesn't. So this whole thing here, this long bit about this long narrative, there's only a couple of bits and pieces that you're really going to pull to say, well, according to this document, there were some problems between the natives and the people of Roanoke, the colonists. By this, we think that, right? And you come up with your ideas on it. That's all you're really going to pull from this article. That's all you're going to pull from this article as well, all right? Is that there were some problems between the natives and the colonists. That's it. Okay, so try not to make this too difficult. It's not a sciencey thing where you're trying to memorize it all. You're just trying to get an idea of what probably happened. And the hard part with this first document is that it's written in the English of the time. It's a primary source, which means you have to figure out what some of the words mean because they're written in a different kind of spelling and a different kind of word use than we're used to. Okay, so you just gotta kind of read through it and ascertain what you think it's talking about and do your best. All right, thanks a lot.